Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of MFP Live. We took a couple weeks off, and we are back with a very special guest tonight. But first, say hello to my co-founder at the Mississippi Free Press, Kimberly Griffin. Hey, Kimberly. And
Hey.
And our special guest tonight is Kiese Laymon, who, so thrilled to have you here tonight. I'll get my words unjumbled in a minute. It's been a minute. Kiese is, well, most of you know him, but in the event that you don't, he is an author from Jackson, Mississippi, who is right now, I guess, do you call it in the middle of a book tour right now for?
I guess so. Virtual book tour. Yeah. From my chair.
That's right. So welcome to MFP Live. We're tickled to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here with y'all. Thank y'all for the work y'all do for Mississippi and Jackson.
Thank you. Kimberly, why don't you take it?
So you and I grew up around the same time in exactly the same neighborhoods. You are, I think, 4 or 5 years. I'm 49. You're about 4 or 5 years younger than I am.
Right.
And so I've heard you, and you may have remembered me asking this question once a long time ago at a book thing. I was really struck by, we have kind of parallel existences because my family, educators, Black educators, didn't really trust schools with a bunch of white teachers. like I can remember my father, who was a school principal, going to Chastain when I was in middle school, he and my mother walking down the hall, and they looking at one another, and they were like, "You see what I'm saying?" And I was like, "What are we seeing?"
Right.
It was like, "What are we seeing?"
Right.
And then, so he went and found his friend, who was the assistant principal, and was like, "What? There's one Black teacher. We saw one. How is that?"
Wow.
And they almost pulled me out, but she convinced them to let me stay. And so they just had this suspicion that you weren't going to be treated right.
Right.
And they didn't. My father always says, we had a teacher who sent our kids to St. Andrews. It was one of his teachers. And I remember thinking, I said to him a little while ago, I said, that was so weird. And he said, well, you all got a superior education anyway.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it.
He's like, she said, that's why I never liked her.
Right.
He's almost 90 now. It's hilarious.
Wow.
But your mother had a very different perspective. It wasn't a wrong perspective. It was just a different perspective about what she wanted for you. Where do you think that came from?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And just so readers know, you went to private schools mostly, right?
I went to Raines public school. We lived in apartments. We moved to the Queens. You know, Raines is right down from the Queens.
Right.
And so I went to Queens, and I went to Raines, and in third grade, this white teacher, you know, went off on me for sitting during the Pledge of the Allegiance. And my mama came to school and she regulated, and she had a friend who was sending her kid to Holy Family at the time, which was an all Black Catholic school.
Yeah, right.
Like completely Black Catholic school, except for the teachers. And my mother really wanted to get me out of Raines, and she heard, you know, I don't know if you remember, but, you know, Holy Family it was very small.
I had a bunch of friends that went to Holy Family.
Yeah, it was really cheap, you know, compared to St. Richard's or even St. Mary's. So I went there, and then Holy Family shut down. And when Holy Family shut down, they allowed those of us who were at Holy Family to go to St. Richard's for the same tuition. So I went to St. Richard's. And then after I went to St. Richard's, I went to school up in Maryland. And when I came back, I went to St. Joe. Not the St. Joe that people know now, but the St. Joe the St. Joe that was predominantly Black and over there off of Bowling Street. So I went to Catholic schools almost my entire life in Mississippi, in Jackson, but they were predominantly Black Catholic schools, with the exception of 8th grade when I went to St. Richard's.
I think, you know what? I think that St. Richard's story stuck out to me. So just was so important in that book, that part of the book for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was so important. Like, I was like, wow, that is, you may want to tell a little bit of that story.
Absolutely. And, you know, that St. Richard's story, like the reason I tell that story in that book was because that year was an oddity for us. You know what I mean? It was the only year of my high school life that I wasn't in a majority black school, with the exception of when I went up to play basketball in Maryland for my 10th grade year. But, you know, when I was at St. Richard's, it was majority. When I was at St. Joe's, majority black. When I was at Holy Family, it was all black. But St. Richard's was the first year that, you know, I went to a school in Jackson, which was majority white. And, you know, we tried to do the same things we did in class, which were like, you know, jokes and you know, playing the dozens and whatnot. And the teacher and some of the students just weren't feeling that. So like my critique, you know, I got kicked out of school, I think the first day of school, because my friend was trying to cut an apple with a dull butter knife. And the teacher acted like he pulled out a machete and he was trying to chop the necks off everybody. And I was just like, what are you doing? Like, he just cutting a fucking grapefruit. I'm sorry if I can't cuss, but anyway, he just cutting a grapefruit. So I got kicked out of school. And of course, I got a whooping that day because my mama was like, you have to know better, right? Like, you have to be twice as good as them to get half as much. And I was like, I'm already twice as good as them. Like, what are you talking about? Like, why am I getting kicked out of school? So, yeah, most of my time in Mississippi and Jackson was not my St. Richard's experience, but I write about it because it was so different than my other experience in Mississippi.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for clarifying that. That was because that St. Richard's story, I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you got from Mississippi to play ball, and then you came back tell us a little bit about that. You came back to St. Joe.
Yeah. So, wow, I never get to talk about this, but so my mother got a postdoc up in College Park, Maryland. And at the time, there was a school called DeMatha, which is one of the highest ranked basketball schools in the country, coached by Morgan Wooten. I'd gone to St. Joe and played basketball as a 9th grader on the varsity team. And then I went up to DeMatha Catholic school up in Hyattsville, Maryland, and played basketball up there. When my mother was doing her postdoc at the University of Maryland right down the street. And when I came back to St. Joe to play ball, they actually said that we were violating like a Supreme Court ruling. So we had to make a filing to the Supreme Court because what they said was that St. Joe recruited me to play basketball. So if you look in the filings of the Supreme Court, like my name is there, and we actually had to forfeit all of these wins because they said that we cheated when we didn't cheat at all. Like when I went to St. Joe, initially I lived in North Jackson. When I came back to St. Joe, my mama had moved to the Reservoir. And so they were just like, why is this kid going to St. Joe? It was just such a silly thing. But the interesting thing is, if you look in the Supreme Court records, it'll be like Laymon versus Mississippi High School, because they were trying to say like we cheated, which is like, I was not Othello Harrington or Ronnie Henderson. You know what I'm saying? Like I liked the ball, but I wasn't like one of those ballers.
Oh my gosh.
Basketball was life. Yeah. Oh, there it is right there. Yeah. Oh, wow. How'd y'all? That's crazy. There it is. Yeah. That's it. Oh, it's got my mama's name right up in there too. Yep.
You never know what he's going to put on the screen. So
that's crazy.
He'll be surprising you. So was that like a version of the jumping the line? Like it
wasn't a version of nothing. It was like we beat some school and they wanted to be like we were cheating and we weren't, because St. Joe was one of these weird schools where it competed against the public schools, but it was a Catholic school. But but then again, it wasn't a Catholic school that like the private academies would ever play. You see what I'm saying? It was in this weird position. Like it competed against Callaway and competed against all these other schools, but we never did is play prep or JA or any of the academies and whatnot. So somehow they tried to make it seem like they were recruiting me, which could be as far from true as possible. I wanted to go to St. Joe. Like that was the trajectory I was on my entire career. But anyway, it was just the interesting thing about it is like how much I love basketball. So when people often talk to me about high school, I talk about writing. But when I was in high school, the thing that was most interesting to me was sports. Like that was it.
Yeah, I was just reading your essay book, and I was thinking that I was looking at the Ole Miss, essay, but it was really striking me, your talk of sports as you often do, right? I mean, we're from Mississippi. We're from the South. We love sports. You know, people
We
are
do.
surprised to hear how much I love sports, you know, when I was in the North. And I wasn't always talking about it. And then I get on the phone with my stepdad and we would just go off on sports, you know, and people couldn't, you know, they just didn't believe that it was, and I'm sure you get that sometimes too.
That's
like
a great point, Donna. You know what? Like when I got my job, wow, yeah, you're making me talk about stuff I never get to talk about. Like, so when I got my job teaching at Vassar, I got my job when I was like 26. And for the first 3 years at Vassar, I was the assistant basketball coach.
Mm-hmm.
And like that was my identity, like more than a writer and as much as a professor. Like people on campus knew me as like that professor who coaches basketball. But even up north, it was the first time I realized like, oh, people think people who are not just like participants in sports, but who love sports, people assume a kind of like intellectual like inferiority. And I was just like, that's not where we come from. You know what I mean? Where we come from, the expectation is that you're going to be agile, you're going to be thoughtful intellectually, and you're going to love sports in some form or fashion. And that doesn't mean that you're anything less than. That is definitely not the vibe I got when I started teaching up at Vassar College. It was completely different. And this was a D3 school again. Like these weren't like you know, blue chip Division I athletes, but still often they were treated as if they were intellectually like less than.
It's interesting because you said some names, Harrington, because you came up. It's interesting that, and maybe it's not interesting as much as it is clarity. They accused you of jumping a line into a private school. It wasn't jumping a line. You can't jump a line into a private school. You're just in a private school, right? Like you pay to go there. But that was what time were we in Mississippi? We were funneling half our athletes to Georgetown. We were a basketball state.
Yep, we were.
So I mean, everything was super. And you know, there's this suspicion of black men.
Yep.
So how did he get here?
Right.
What is he doing here? Like suspicion about the grapefruit.
Yep. That's it. That's it. And you know, like that's the thing about that time period. Like, I want to do this documentary about basketball in Jackson because it's so interesting. Because like if you just look at Georgetown, you got Othello, you got Jerry Nichols, you got Sam Funches, all from sort of the same area who go to Georgetown. And then if you broaden it from Georgetown, you got Monte, you got Ronnie, you know, you have all of these, you've got Jozan, you've got Lindsay, all kind of from like if not the same neighborhood, maybe 4 or 5 miles separating. And these dudes, at the most, right? And they all become like athletic phenoms at the most major level possible. And I think that has so much to do with Jackson, but I don't know how yet to tease that out. What do you think about that?
Well, I have many thoughts.
Okay.
I think first we have to talk about Murr and some shadiness. And my brother went to Murr. He's going to come for me. They were jumping some lines.
Oh,
come on now.
We know that. We know that.
But that's one place where that was happening. So that's the place that's closest to me, and that's the place. And I went to Callaway, and we were good. We were very good. It was us and Murr in the championship. Yep. But you can't really, I mean, in the statewide championship. But then it got down to us and Gulfport.
With Chris.
Right. And we were a good team.
Yeah.
They had 12 stars.
Yes.
And so I think that there's something about whatever that coach was doing. He was creating people that could operate without one another.
Ooh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
So he wanted to send them into the world where if they never played together, we were not creating people who could operate without each other.
Right. That's a great
point. We were creating a good team.
Right.
Now, all those people, what's interesting is all those people are very successful people.
Yeah.
Who went to school, got a college degree and played basketball, but one's like a pilot and one's like, like the SWAC athletic director was on one of those teams. Like
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was on one of those Callaway teams because that was a team, right? And so they were creating a relationship, but they were creating stars at Murr. I don't know what they were doing on the coast.
Yeah,
but whatever that is, I think that they were coaching people to go out into the world, and whether that was as a team or as a star, there was a coaching that was different.
Right. I definitely agree with that 100%. And you're so right. The Callaway teams were yeah, you talk about Callaway, and then you talk about Othello, Ronnie, Jesse.
You say Callaway, the 1990 team.
Yeah.
You don't ever remember those guys. I mean, they were my friends. You talk about 91. You remember Callaway 91. You don't ever talk about who was on the team.
That's right. That's right. Because when you say that, I'm thinking, I mean, that's my era, right? And I remember looking up, we looked up to that team. I remember we played Callaway in the Capital Classic and we almost beat them. And that was like in 1990. That was in 1991 when they were good. But I still can't remember who was on that team. They were so good. But who was on that team?
Well, Charles McClellan was on that team.
That's right. That's right.
And he's the SWAC. My friend George Irvin was on that team. He was an Air Force. He's an Air Force pilot. He went to the Air Force Academy.
That's amazing.
Like, I can tell you, like, they turned out what that coach was coaching for something else.
Yes.
But that's how we lost players.
No doubt.
It's because we lost James Robinson. He was in my neighborhood.
Woo!
But he went to Murrah.
And everybody knew James was not supposed to be at Murrah. And James was, and that's the thing about basketball at that time. It's just like, we talk about those dudes as superheroes because we'd never seen them do. I'd never seen anybody do what James Robinson could do. He'd come down chewing bubble gum. That dude would be like cross half court, blow a bubble, and pull up for like a 35-foot three and turn around before the shit goes in and blow another bubble. Like that literally happened. That literally happened, So like they became superstars. But yeah, I think you're onto something about the way Coach Jordan created individuals who could go on and do something as opposed to a team. I feel that.
So, but you should do that documentary, and you should get funding for that.
Yeah.
Kimberly in there.
Somebody approached me about doing it. It would be about the neighborhood, though. It would be focusing on the neighborhood in the larger kind. And I do think you're right about the codes. I think Chris let us know you could be excellent in basketball nationwide. Chris Jackson, former Chris Jackson, currently Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. And then I think Steve Galloway and I think other people took it from there, and definitely James. But yeah, like we had to see that like someone from Mississippi could be the greatest. And I remember when I went to DeMatha was like ranked number like 7 in the nation. And I went there and I was just like, damn, like they can't play. Like, they couldn't play like we could play. They were higher ranked. And then I came back for winter to watch St. Joe play somebody. And St. Joe was really good that year. And then I saw Othello. I remember, and then Othello was like, somebody was like, yo, Othello's like the number 2 ranked sophomore in the nation. And I was like, you mean the city? And they were like, no, the nation. And I was like, we were just playing fucking in the backyard. Like, how did he become the best dude in the nation? And they were, I mean, my friend LaThun, he was like, yeah, bro, shit done changed. And I was just like, that was literally when I was like, okay, I cannot think about basketball as my future anymore. Like, I need to start writing and reading or something, because I'm not 6'9", I'm not fast like that, so.
Well, I want to ask you, I don't know if it's as much fun, but how'd you end up at Millsaps?
Basketball. It was
okay.
Coach Stroud. Coach Stroud was a coach there. He came, I mean, actually, I'm being dishonest. Basketball, and I didn't want to leave my girlfriend.
I think you wrote about that.
My girlfriend was a year younger than I was, so she was going to be coming up. I didn't want to leave Jackson, but also I really wanted to play basketball. I wasn't good enough to go to play at Jackson State at D1, and Millsaps had a really good D3 team, and I was just gonna go there and play. But like my first semester, before we can even start practicing, I like to eat too much, man. Like I ate myself out of a shooting guard position, and then I was like, before I knew it, I was like, okay, well, I'm too fat to play the way I want to play. And then I started falling into the reading and writing. But when I left Millsaps and went to Oberlin, I played basketball for my whole time there.
Yeah. It's been a little while since I've read the memoir, but all of it kind of comes back when you're talking about it. Well, I want you to veer a little bit, and I want to talk about higher ed and Mississippi's tone with you.
Okay.
And you can see where this is going. But the thing that strikes me about Millsaps, and like even your, the things you've written about and your interactions with Tate Reeves, for instance.
Mm.
Millsaps is this really interesting institution, I think, in our kind of cultural memory, because we have it working with in civil rights work and working with Tougaloo and, a lot of the really interesting things that, and, for then, I guess, daring things that it did. But then you have written a lot about some of the things that you experienced there. I just want you to talk a little bit more about that. I'm not sure what the question is, but, just being this institution kind of, the two things kind of going on at once in the state of Mississippi, especially.
Yeah. The thing I'll say about Millsaps is I learned when I look back at my time at Millsaps that like bars actually work. You know what I mean? Like, so when I was growing up in Jackson, we would drive by Millsaps often, but I saw those bars, and I saw that the bars that were on West Street, I think it was West Street. I think the bars those bars are always closed. The bars over on the shit facing Belhaven,
that's right,
they were open. And so I didn't know anybody at Belhaven much of my time as a young person in Jackson, but I knew people on the other side. And so I just never thought there was anything in there for us. And real talk, it wasn't until Coach Strauss started trying to recruit me and my friend Terry that I even looked at Millsaps as somewhere that I could potentially go. And then you look and you see the history again, and the history of Tougaloo, history with just this being supposedly on the forefront of a kind of Jackson civil rights for a long time. And it called itself the quote unquote best school in Mississippi. Like that's what it called itself. Remember, they were always be saying them Harvard of the South, and now you find out every school calls itself the Harvard of the South, of the Midwest.
Right.
But anyway, so I didn't know anything about Millsaps, and I wasn't prepared, not intellectually. I was definitely prepared intellectually. I wasn't prepared politically for what it would mean to go to a neo-Confederate school filled with not just wealthy white people, but wealthy and poor white people who were passing as wealthy white people when you were one of the few black folks there. And of all the black men there, we were all there to play a sport. There were probably one or two black men I knew who weren't recruited to play a sport. That says a lot about that place. You know what I'm trying to say? But also will say it was college. And so it was the first time I was free, first time I was allowed to explore on my own terms. So I learned a lot at Millsaps, but Millsaps did not know how to deal with the black student who was trying to experiment with art. And that's at the end of the day, that's a generous reading of what those people did. You know what I'm saying? They kicked me out of school for taking a library book out of the library and taking it back. That's what I got kicked out of college for. And I was told I could come back after a year if I went to a shrink of their choosing, because they said that I had psychological issues and I couldn't get along with white people. And, I just think as an educator now, you don't kick a kid out for fucking taking a library book. I don't care what they did previously. You do not do that, and it's just so ironic growing up in Jackson, being always taught that black boys need to read more and black boys need to find themselves in the book more. The motherfucker, they kicked me out for taking a book out of the library, Red Badge of Courage. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't go to steal the book. I went to check the book out for my girlfriend at the time, but I left my ID. So I dropped the book, kicked it under the scanner, looked at the video, looked at the thing. And then the next day I get the call, I need to come talk to the dean because they got me on tape for theft. And I was just like, what the fuck did I steal? And then I was like, oh, a library book. Oh, I was like, oh, but I brought that back. But, by that point, they wanted me to get up out of there and they were going to use anything.
Well, that seems to symbolize a lot, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think about what would have happened if the internet were around. Because in the absence of the internet, there were news crews that were called and they got some footage of those fraternity members in blackface, Afro wigs and capes. But I also think it'd be really interesting because, there were some pretty well-known Jackson politicians and business people who were also members of the Kappa Alpha fraternity, the Kappa Sig fraternity, who were out there, and with me and my girlfriend. So, it didn't have to end up that way. But again, I think we're all have some culpability, but like we were kids, even those frat members, like we were 19, 20 years old. The adults in that situation, I think, didn't give us a model of how to deal with that kind of tension.
Hey, tell that for those who might be watching who don't really know what you're talking about there as much. Tell a little bit more about that story and what you actually saw.
Yeah, so I was one of the editors for the paper. My girlfriend was the art editor for the paper, and I was writing lots of essays that were satirical critiques of the Greek system, satirical critiques of like neo-Confederate investments and patriarchy, anti-blackness, all of this stuff. But it was experimental stuff. But I was critiquing. I was very upfront about my critiques of the KAs and fraternity culture in general and the school. And so like we were going to work one morning and it was bid day, and bid day, the fraternities stay up all night drinking and doing all kind of stuff, and then they receive their pledges. We just happened to be walking out of the dorm to go to our car to go work. We were working at the Ton of Fun. I don't know if y'all know Ton of Fun. It was like this old fake Chuck E. Cheese back over there by North Park. And as we were walking to the car, like one or two of them were like, Kiese, write about this. And then they said, and we're 19, like we're young, and we from Mississippi too. Like if you don't have to disrespect us too much for us to want to come back at you, right? So they're like, write about this, and we turn around, and then they start calling us niggas and start calling her a B word. And because they had already threatened me, I had a gun in my dorm room, and I never used the gun, but the gun was there for protection because of some other stuff that had happened. Mm-hmm. And so I go back to the dorm. I decide whether or not to get the gun or not. My girlfriend picks up a bottle. I put the gun back in the drawer. I get a little T-ball bat, and we walk back out. And then they just, they keep on assaulting us with words and blackface and Afro wigs and Confederate capes. And there were some deans out there who saw it all. And so we get into it. And long story short, they put me and they put my partner, my girlfriend, on disciplinary probation, saying we use racially discriminatory language. And then they put the two fraternities on some sort of like probation. Like they couldn't have parties for a while. The individuals, I don't think the individuals got put on disciplinary probation. And once you get put on disciplinary probation, they can kick you out for anything. Mm-hmm. And, among that group of people were some people, like some people who ended up becoming, governors and all sorts of things. And my critique of that is not so much like let's hold Tate Reeves accountable for what he did when he was 19 or 20, but let's allow voters and people to talk about what we did when we were 19 or 20 mm-hmm, and why. Mm-hmm, you know what I'm saying? Like, and why? And that's always been my thing. Like, let's talk about why we were out there, why they were out there in Afro wigs, why they were out there in blackface. Let's talk about why I thought I needed to have a gun. Mm-hmm. And I just think like in the absence of those kind of conversations, we get what we get, so.
Well, I hear you, because if, young people do stupid things. Right. I mean, we know this, but right. If you can't then as an adult have a conversation about that and why it was hurtful or why it was a mistake or whatever the case might be, then I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that. There's no way to learn a lesson from it.
No way. It's impossible. Like that, like this is the thing about, the most terrifying thing about what Trump has done is that he has doubled down on making people who don't want to revise or remember or reckon feel like revising, remembering, and reckoning are like antithetical to being American, right? Like right. If you go back and you regret, like that's not what American men do. But that is exactly what we need to do if we want to not repeat the failures of the past. And the fact that we don't ask that of like our governors or like the people who we elect says everything not about them, but about us. You know what I'm saying? My beef isn't with Tate. I think we all know who Tate Reeves is. We all know what Tate Reeves values. My beef is with the people who make Tate Reeves in charge and don't necessitate that Tate Reeves like ask himself like hard questions. And that's not Tate Reeves' fault. Just like Trump, Tate Reeves is going to be who Tate Reeves is, who Tate Reeves has always been. But the question is like, why would we put people like that in control of so much? Like that's the terrifying You know, I was raised by my grandma was like, a fool gonna be a fool. The question is, are you foolish enough to follow? And so, like, if you foolish enough to follow these fools, like, that's what we need to talk about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and the whole thing with Confederate Heritage Month. I mean, you know, I've been like, I dig it out. I go look on the Confederate sites and find it somewhere every year, because it's not even like they're proclaiming it proudly, you know. Right. I mean, so right. You know there's a problem with it, or you wouldn't be hiding it over there on some you know, racist Facebook page. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
That's right.
You know, and for me, you know, coming at it as a white woman who grew up in Mississippi and am real sick of all this bullshit.
Right.
It's like, you know, I see that, and it's like, you're just, first of all, they're just making all these assumptions about the white people of Mississippi too are going to go along with them. And of course, a lot of them do, or at least they let them get away with it.
Right.
But, you know, why can't, I don't know. I even lost my thought in the middle. I'm so mad about it. But it's like, why play us this way? I mean, why present the state in such a way? And I get it. It's some sort of crazy power consolidation and all those things that they use it for. But it's just, it's astonishing. I mean, it just, you know, you're playing, I don't know. Somebody else take it. I can't even.
And I'll just say one thing to that. I'll just say one thing to that, Donna. And I think those people who are new to Mississippi don't realize, like, if you look at that same time, we're talking about when, you know, basketball is like jumping, like 89 to 90. And actually a little bit before that, like, you know, William Winter is there, you know, in the 80s. Ray Mabus is there. I'm not saying that these are like great politicians, but these are like demonstrably like left of center politicians compared to the politicians that we have now. And I think some people don't understand that there was a point when, for lots of reasons, the Democratic Party in Mississippi was a lot stronger, like unquestioned, right? And I don't think you have to do a deep dive into the politics to understand like what happens, and what happens partially happens because of like a split in the Democratic Party that I think is a split along racial lines. And then the Democratic Party loses everything. I'm sorry, loses everything. And we've been losing everything ever since then. But like, let's not act like that time in Mississippi wasn't real. Like, there was a moment when like we as Mississippians were like, we want to pay teachers more, right? Like we want like all of our fucking children to have like equal access to everything. And then it just shifts. I just think it's important for us to like look at that.
Well, I agree with you. And I'm gonna kick it back to Kimberly. That on politics, it's like, you know, white Democrats in our state have, you know, and I'm not going to say every one of them, but it's like you know, have gone after the same, try to fight for those same people who want Confederate Heritage Month and those things.
Right.
I mean, I've been saying it for years and pissing off a lot of Democrats, but it's like, you got to try something different. For one thing, you're losing. So you don't do it as well as somebody else.
Right.
So, you know, it's a leadership thing, you know, you just gotta, it's crazy. Now, I do want to say tort reform, which I reported a lot about, and it's not talked about nearly enough, but tort reform was really a political ploy, and it was played, and we've reported this, but you know, it was played in a very racist way about all the Black people getting rich, especially those people in Holmes County getting rich off these lawsuits. And it was stated, I mean, it was known then, it's in Jerry Nash and Andy Taggart's book on Mississippi politics, that it was being used as a way to defund trial attorneys who were giving money to who were largely funding the Democratic campaigns.
No question. So, I mean, you know, we can call it what it is. Like, tort reform in Mississippi was partially an attempt to go at Isaac Byrd. Like, partially an attempt to go at Isaac Byrd. And like, Isaac Byrd is someone I know very well, and someone I know intimately, and someone who, you know, despite interpersonal things, was attempting to do a lot of progressive things for Mississippi. And that tort reform stuff was attempting to take his legs out from under him, but also like literally like not grant some Black people who were harmed shit that they deserve.
Exactly.
So, anyway, I just, Kimberly, I know you want to jump up in here.
Yeah. You take it, Kimberly. We're going off a
I had lots of. I'm walking somewhere, But so I have my best friend and her husband and several of my friends went to Millsaps, and they were probably a first round of students who were a response to the Ayers case, being afraid that they were going to be sued in a different way for a different reason. So they all went to Millsaps on an academic scholarship, and they had a friend down the hall who was a Black man who was a member of KA. And I can remember, because I didn't know what it was. Because I grew up, if you're not an AK on Delta, I really don't understand. And so I was sitting in their room, and I remember my friend's husband and his best friend were like calling this person's name. What are you gonna be, the slave? Like, I'm gonna be the gentleman. And he was the gentleman that opened the door. And they were like, sir. And then every decade or so, someone tries to introduce me to this same person, because I guess we're so well spoken.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm aware of who it is. Anyway, I said all that to say, you talked about men in America and this idea that they're not supposed to have regret, that they're not supposed to ask for forgiveness, that they're not supposed to talk about things that have happened to them and say that I shouldn't have done that, but here's why I did it. And one of the things my sister and I were talking about the other night is there's a fragility about looking bad, making mistakes. Whereas women will be like, I'm just going to have to, I may not be qualified exactly to do this thing, but I'm going to try to get this thing done. You talk a lot about the women in your life and how important they have been. Will you say a little bit about the heavy lifting that Black women in Mississippi have done and continue to do, and what they mean to community, and how they've kept the community together and created the community sometimes when there wasn't a community?
Oh my goodness. I mean, Kimberly, like, there's so many levels to that question. But I want to jump in sort of like not at the origin, but like at like why this isn't a problem in our state. You don't have to look long and hard to understand that, like, particularly Black women in this state have like held us. And when I say us, I'm talking about Black men, I'm talking about Black communities, and I'm talking about white folks too, like have held Mississippi necessarily like together, whether we're talking about Fannie Lou Hamer, whatever, like, whether we're talking about Margaret Walker, we talk about even my mama, whether we're talking about those people who didn't have educations, who hold up those rural communities, who held up all of those churches. When I look out and I use my eyes and I use my artistic, whatever to describe, I have to describe like that, you can call it matrilineal, you can call it matriarchal, whatever. But the question is, why in a state that is so necessarily dependent on the leadership and love and care of Black women, don't we see Black women in positions of power politically? In Jackson, in Rankin County, in the Delta, in Northern Mississippi, you know what I'm saying? Like on a statewide level, like we have to, like when we talk about the race line in Mississippi, if we're not also talking about the way gender inflects that race line, we're not talking about the race line. Like one of the problems with our state is that we have not decided to give Black women an opportunity to run the state. But Black women are sort of running the state behind the scenes. So the question is, what happens then if the state and the stakeholders in the state realize that Black women who have been holding this shit together and being like the demonstrable fucking like pantheon of the best of us, like what happens if we decide we need to see them overrepresented on city councils? We need to see them overrepresented on anything that we can vote for, because right now they're woefully underrepresented damn near across the board, and Mississippi is losing. So let's try something different and see if we can start winning. That's how I feel about it.
Well, it's interesting because I'm a Christian person. I go to church, and I will not go to your church if you do not ordain women. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Why are we sitting up in here? And and people say, I don't know what to do. I said, well, if y'all got up and left one Sunday, y'all will shut all that down, because ain't gonna be but 5 people in there.
That's it.
They'll ordain everybody up in there.
Listen, I've been to black. I was raised on a black missionary Baptist church. Like, grew up in missionary Baptist church. Like, that black missionary Baptist church dictates a lot of my sensibilities. And to this day, I'm still like, what the deacons do? Because I just see the deacons they just be over there in suits. But like, my grandmama deaconess, but she was like on the usher board. She running fucking Sunday school. She making sure that everybody is one, that the guest preachers paid, making sure that everybody got a plate. So and so is allergic to peanut butter. But so I can tell you what the deaconesses do, but I still don't know what the deacons do. And I feel like that is sort of what we see in our state. What are we men doing, fam? On these city councils, as mayors, as governors. And the question is, not enough. So if we were really about it, not only would we support like black women candidates specifically, but we as black men would be like, as much as I want to occupy that position of power, it ain't my time.
Mm-hmm.
That ain't for me. That's not ethically sound. And so that's a remedial sort of like step. And it's like a representative step, which people often say is like suspect politically. And I agree, actually. But still, I would love to see Jackson and Mississippi be led by black women, since those are the people who've held us down since I've been alive.
Interesting.
Oh, go ahead, Kimberly.
Yeah, the Byram, I don't know what they called it. Alderman board. People. I guess 5 black women got elected.
Wow.
This week. Yeah. So go look that up. Now
that's huge.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a story on that.
That's huge.
Well, one of the things I remember you writing was when you saw, when you would see your mother as the only black woman political scientist that would be brought out during election season. Mm-hmm, now I'm in media, so of course that immediately spoke to me. But and it's true for all women, that we have very few women in political voices here, period. And certainly true for black women.
Right.
And so I don't know I guess what I'm thinking when I listen to y'all talk about that is that, the media needs to do our job too. We need to, mm-hmm. and our parties, our strategists, we need women prominent, all women, but certainly black women, in more prominent roles talking about politics. I mean, how often do we even get to hear that?
That's a great point.
State? I mean, anywhere,
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I was just really struck by that, and I knew who your mother was, and I think we had interviewed her for several times, and I think we'd go find her because we needed at the Jackson Free Press. But it's representation, more.
Right.
That would help a lot. It's not the only answer, but it would certainly help a lot.
It would help a lot, and I'm a big fan of allowing people who've earned positions but who haven't been given them opportunities to fail. Now, we understand that black women in positions of power, if they fail, they're going to be punished much more harshly than any group of people. I don't think that should be true, and I think black women have earned the right to politically fail us because they politically succeeded with a small p in our homes and in our communities. And historically, we know that's true. Do you know what I'm saying? So we got a lot to deal with in our state. And racism is one thing, but patriarchy is a completely equally destructive force.
I also think that there's something that we don't want to talk about. I don't want to talk about it because I'm a black Mississippian, so I like secrets. I I know I like a secret. But nationally, we have to ask ourselves, why was our president and now our vice president black people? They not less black. They're not descendants of slaves.
Right.
And so there's some reckoning we don't want to do with particularly descendants of slaves. We look at Colin Powell. He's not a descendant of slaves. He's a Bahamian or either Jamaican immigrant.
Right.
I mean, Condoleezza Rice is a descendant of slaves. But if you just start drilling down on some of that, what is it? We don't want to do that reckoning.
Yeah, we don't want to do it publicly, right? Because even when you say it, I'll say anything. But you know, I'm like,
well,
oh,
you were
shit.
like, oh, we're gonna talk about that in public.
Damn, do we want to? You know, but it's something that we need to sit in and deal with, right? Like yes, it's undeniable that these particular political figures who are like deeply loved in Black communities are different than most of the Black communities who love them, right? Like have a different constitution, and I want to talk about that different constitution critically. You know what I mean? Because which means we have to do that hard conversation, which is to talk about like all the Black folks in this nation are not just here, like didn't come the way our people came. Like our people were dragged over here and said, do your shit. Like some people were like, hey, like I want to come. Like that's a different experience. But I think we need to sit in that and really talk about like the things we talk about when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about privilege, we talk about anti-Blackness, we talk about colorism. I think we kind of need to sit in that a bit more. But it is scary to talk about. Like I'm scared that I just said what I said. You know what I mean? Like I don't know why it's scary to talk about, but it's very scary to talk about.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, well, you remember when School Days came out and we were all like, we talking about colorism outside the house?
Right.
Oh,
that's right.
I didn't I was Meadowbrook in the movie theater in Jackson. I remember sitting there like this.
Yo.
Are we going we don't talk about this in the streets?
No, and
we do not talk about colorism
at all.
We do not talk about light skin privilege. We don't talk about certain sororities being light skinned, certain sororities being. We don't talk about that. We talk about that at church and at our house. And now Spike Lee has put it on the film for everyone to see.
My mama took me to that movie, and it was, there used to be a theater right down from Jackson State, like across from the bowling alley. That theater, like behind, I don't remember what the name of it was, but I saw that movie, fam, and my mama and them walked out of there speechless. Like we had never seen that private part of us made public, like on a big old screen. And there was a lot of stuff. I mean, it was even, remember when there was that scene where she was licking his brand. She licked his curl first, and then she licked his brand. And I was like, as a young person, I mean, I must have been like 14 or something. I was just like, first of all, with my mom, I'm like, well, wait a minute now. Like, I thought this was about school, And then there was that scene where Samuel Jackson is like, he's one of the people in the town, and he was like, y'all are different than us. Like, y'all think y'all are so much better. And he was like, the line he said was, y'all are niggas just like us. Like, I just remember it like it was yesterday. So yeah, there was a lot in that film for sure.
Yeah. And so, but I think the thing that we all have to deal with that we don't want to deal with necessarily, and I'm not prepared to deal with it. So I'm just saying that. Okay. But we got to have those conversations with our kids about those things, and we don't want to have those conversations
that is
either.
It, Kimberly, like that is, and I try to create books that encourage those conversations, but books don't do all of the work. You still need like engaged teachers, and really you need engaged parents, but that's hard because we've been taught that those things should not be written about, should not be read, and definitely should not be talked about. So go ahead.
We come from a culture of secret keepers. You kept yourself safe during slavery. You escaped by being, you learned to read in secret. You escaped in secret. We are secret keepers. And so if you keep the secrets, then you keep your family safe.
That's right.
So this is a secret. We don't need to talk about that anywhere else.
Right. That's it.
Speaking of Ed Emmett said it was Cinema West.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
Knows. Yeah.
That's what it was. Cinema West. That's it.
So speaking of secret keepers, no, I got to ask you about the University of Mississippi, because as you know, Kimberly and I, without knowing that when we started the Mississippi Free Press, we were going to end up doing a whole lot of heavy duty reporting on the University of Mississippi. But that had to be done. And, so you've just recently left there.
I still teach there.
Okay. But you're not going to be teaching there, right? Is that
I don't think I'll be teaching there.
Oh, okay. So I don't know the exact story of what's going on. But just talk about, because, I read your essay that I think you wrote when you first got to the University of Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just want to hear what you have to say about your experiences there, and I don't know what you learned, or where it's, where the university is to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be brief, because I could talk about that for hours, but I was at I got tenure up at Vassar College, and I really needed and wanted to come back to Mississippi. They offered me the John Grisham Fellowship, which was a year to teach 1 or 2 courses at the University of Mississippi, but also a year to finish my book. I came back to Mississippi because spiritually I needed to be closer to home, but also I needed to finish heavy. So I finished heavy at University of Mississippi. So I want to say I'm thankful for that space and that time. I met some amazing colleagues, and the students, oh my goodness gracious, the students, they just blow my mind, right? The students are different than students that I've met in other places. And the University of Mississippi is, I think, one of the things that draws some people is that it, especially the English, it doesn't necessarily abide by rules. It's sort of it's like Faulkner, you don't have, but sometimes when you don't abide by rules, the same vulnerable people get taken advantage of. And so on one hand, I got tired of everywhere I went, it said University of Mississippi. And my career has been a commercial for the University of Mississippi the last 4 or 5 years. You know what I'm saying? I've sold hundreds of thousands of books. Everywhere those books go, it says University of Mississippi. And if my name is going to be a commercial for your institution, well, your institution has to do right. Okay. So the institution is not going to do right. All right. But then on a smaller level, it's within my own fiction part of the institution, those people, you don't have to do what I say, but we at least have to be ethical when it pertains to students, particularly students of color and vulnerable students. And when my colleagues sometimes decide they're not going to do ethical shit around students of color and vulnerable students, and they're going to do what I consider that's when I have to be all right, well, I have options, so I probably don't need to be here anymore. That's as generous a take I can give about the University of Mississippi. If you want to ask me more specific questions, we can talk about it. But it's a place that pats itself on the back for realizing that it's coming in last. And I just think sometimes we need to not pat ourselves on the back for realizing 30 years too late that we should have done something. I think you do the work of talking about why it took us 30 years to remove a statue, or 40 or 50 or 78 years, as opposed to patting yourself on the back for doing something that other also neo-Confederate institutions did 10 or 15 years ago. It's way more complicated than that, but that's as generous as I can be.
Well, it has a way of, and maybe I'm being generous here too, but of looking like PR from the outside, that, where things can be wrapped up in neat packages, such as the Ed Meek affair, or, and then all of these other things are out there. But I think what gets me about it, we know that history is there. We know that there are those influences. We know there are donors who want it to be the old way. But why do so many people gather around that still to help prop it up when it's discovered? That's what I don't get. It's almost as if the institution itself seems to become more important than, like you're talking about, and which I was, I'm still obsessed with, the protection of young women having their pictures taken on the square or whatever the case might be.
Listen, I've been teaching. I was born on a college campus, right? I was born at Jackson State University. I was born literally there. Yeah. And, I got kicked out of Millsaps. I went to Jackson State. I went to Oberlin. I went to Indiana University. I immediately went to Vassar. Immediately after that, I go to Oberlin. I'm institutionalized. I've been at these institutions my entire life. I have never in my life seen anything like what Ed Meek did, ever. I have never seen a donor somehow take pictures of Black girls out on the square dressed like white girls out on the square and their pictures being disseminated to somehow speak to like, this is how property values are plummeting. That is when I started to see what my institution, that institution where I worked really was, because that's an opportunity for everybody to step up. Everyone to step up. Right. Every single person on that campus should have stepped up and said, hell no, never, ever, 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 ever again. But instead, it was treated like this secret. And Ed Meek was coddled. And what we didn't do is we didn't foreground like what was actually done to those Black women who were just out there trying to have some fun on a fucking Saturday night. I've never seen it. And then after that, you know, the Ole Miss students go and they shoot up the Emmett Till sign and pose. And then we find out that they're like keeping that below the surface. So all I'm saying is, if Ole Miss wants to be what it claims to be, which is among other things, courageous, at some point the leadership and or the faculty and or the students and or Oxford have to stand up and be like, fucking be courageous. Don't just or admit that you a coward. You can't have it both ways. And what I see is cowardice pushed to the brink, and then it has to act, and that act is supposed to be labeled as courageous. But fam, you didn't act until you had to act. That's what a coward does. It's okay to be a cowardly institution, but hold that. Claim that. Don't be a fucking coward and then claim that you a goddamn like you know, out there like chivalrously. Like, no, that's cowardly shit. So like, that's where I am. And I know all institutions deal in cowardly shit, but there's a particularity to the cowardly shit I see at the University of Mississippi and their opportunities. Every cowardly move we make as individuals and institution, that's an opportunity for us to teach ourselves and teach the students. And I think sometimes we don't step up to that. And I'm just saying, when we don't step up, we need to call ourselves what we are, cowards. I'm a coward most of the time. That institution is a coward as well, but it wants to act as if it's a hero. Nah, so it can't do that no more with my name attached to it. That's all.
Well, I hear you. I feel you. And then on top of everything else, it's like once they finally do something to Meek and take his name off of it, and then we figure out there's all this other stuff that anyway, you know exactly what I'm talking about through our email series. And it's just this cycle that keeps going. You know, one of the things I, in some of the follow-up stories to the emails series, we talked to some Black faculty and Black students, student leaders. And, you know, I'll be honest, and it's not just because I went to Mississippi State, which has got its own problems, right? And I'm not sugarcoating that, but so it's not that at all, even though they'll say it. But I've always struggled with this idea of Black students choosing to go to Ole Miss. Like, why would you? I mean, you just think that. But these students, that's what I'm saying. These students made it, I loved them because they really made it clear that, well, for one thing, we're not going to change Mississippi if we don't change its flagship university. Right. You know, and they really made me see that.
And I want to say thank you for bringing that up, because I was one of those people who grew up in Jackson, and none of my people ever went to. I mean, like it was never even a possibility that any of the folks that I grew up with and loved would go to University of Mississippi. So when I get there is a part of me that's like, even, you know, because I'm there first year as a fellowship, I'm like, man, who would, you know, what kind of Black students would go? And then you meet, and they're like Black students who want the opportunity to learn. Like, you know what I'm saying? And like, they believe that at this institution, like they will be pushed and they will learn. And you know what? This is where I think the paradox comes in. Like so many Black students that I've met at that institution are not just like great students, but like some of the greatest students that I will ever encounter. And part of that is because of the education they got at the University of Mississippi. I don't think we have to act like the education that a lot of these students are getting is so bad simply because the institution sometimes chooses to be cowardly. It is a cowardly institution. And it also has done, I think, a great job at educating and being educated by like some of the best and brightest Black students and all students from Mississippi and from the Deep South. But I just think like I'm glad that you bring that up. Like, let's not play ourselves. Those Black students at University of Mississippi are doing it. And sometimes they're doing it in spite of institutional support. And sometimes they're doing it because of institutional support, but they are doing it, fam, like in a way that I was shocked to see. And if you think any of that progressive stuff, quote unquote, that's happening at University of Mississippi is happening because people just decided to do right, you're just wrong. Almost all of that shit is happening because usually Black students and multiracial groups of students as well, but led by Black students, are pushing that stuff in addition to trying to get their work done. That is incredible, but it's also something we shouldn't ask of our young people.
Wow. And that's the exact reaction. I mean, they took me to school, you know, with their comments in a way that I really appreciated and felt like I needed, you know, and I came out of that feeling very, very impressed, you know, at their courage in some ways. I mean, you know, that's part of it is courage, but also they're brilliant. You're right. And they're choosing to go there. And yeah, these guys, he's putting these articles on the screen, but I think one of my favorite thing coming out of that whole series was getting to know a lot of these students who were addressing, you know, who were having real complicated, honest conversations about these things and why they were there and what they are
the best of us. Like, the question is, like, do we give them context to be their best selves? And often we do, but often we do not. But those students are like the best of as all, I think, all of our students in Mississippi, but in a way that I was shocked by. You know, I thought that if you chose to go to Ole Miss as a Black student, you weren't going to have any political consciousness. You weren't want to like try to act like you weren't Black and all that. That's the complete opposite of what I found, which is shocking and says a lot about the lack of imagination that I had.
Well, I can say this state grad has a real soft spot for University of Mississippi at this point after going through all of this and meeting them. Seriously, not for everybody at the University of Mississippi. Don't get me wrong. But I care more about that university than I ever thought possible because of all the amazing people I've met through all this work. So I mean,
thank y'all for doing that work. You know, I know some people see it as, you know, y'all just trying to like cause trouble or whatever, but you know, like the secrecy that Kimberly's talking about, if it harms the most vulnerable, like it especially needs to be uncovered. You know what I mean? We don't need to harm people who the state has already decided that it is going to perpetually harm. And when we see secrets doing that work, we got to uncover the secrets. So
that's right. And thank you for saying that. And I've told that to many people. We just had no choice. Once we knew, we had to do it. And you know, and that's for the very reasons that you're talking about. Thank you so much, Kiese. This was so much
Donna.
fun.
Thank you, Kimberly. I appreciate this.
Man, and yes, this was just wonderful. And to the viewers out there, please share this. We also have a YouTube channel now, so share it around. We get a lot of viewers after the fact. We really appreciate everybody tuning in for this. And this really, I think, honest and fun and sports obsessed conversation, you know, with these three native Mississippians. And so good luck out there, Kiese. We didn't really talk about this wonderful book, Long Division, that I'm reading right now. But y'all pick it up. This is a wonderful novel. If you haven't read it so far, it's kind of a romp in a way. It's really great. A romp with history.
That's right.
So please pick up the book. Read all his books if you haven't. Every word in them is just amazing. So thank you both. Thank you, Kimberly, for being here. Also out there, remember we are a nonprofit Mississippi statewide news outlet. Speaking and reporting truth to power. Another amazing author, Angie Thomas, who is on our advisory board at MFP, has a $10,000 match out there right now to double your gifts for what we are defiantly calling our Truth to Power giving campaign. So if you guys can throw anything into our tip jar at mfp.ms/donate, our publisher, Kimberly here, will be very happy with you. So thank you all, and we will see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.